In the final collapsing year of the American Civil War, the United States stood on the edge of transformation. What had begun 4 years earlier as a struggle over secession was now the last desperate chapter of a nation split in two. By 1865, the attention of both armies drifted back toward the Carolinas, the region where this long tragedy had first ignited. And in those final months, the war moved with the momentum of inevitability, as though the country itself had already decided the end was coming. The year opened with the Union's renewed focus on North Carolina. Their eyes were set on Fort Fisher, the last major Confederate stronghold on the Atlantic coast. A few months earlier, Union forces had attempted to capture the fort and failed. But failure was something General Ulysses S. Grant did not tolerate for long. In January, he sent a larger, more coordinated attack force. Major General Alfred Terry commanded the Army of the James, while Rear Admiral David D. Porter led a massive naval contingent of more than 50 ships. Their combined goal was simple: shut down the South's final seaport and choke the Confederacy from the outside in. Terry divided his troops into two wings. One was a division of U.S. colored troops under the capable command of Brigadier General Charles Payne. The other, led by Brigadier General Adelbert Ames, worked alongside Marines and sailors who would storm the fort directly. Together they approached with a precision the Confederates were not prepared to meet. General Hoke attempted a defense, but his resistance faltered quickly. The fighting over the fort was bitter, loud, and chaotic, but before the night ended, the Union flag flew over Fort Fisher. This was more than victory. It was the slow tightening of a noose around the Confederacy's last hopes. To the north, General William Tecumseh Sherman had already earned a reputation that struck fear into the heart of the South. After burning his way through Georgia, he turned toward South Carolina, the first state to secede and the symbolic birthplace of the conflict. When Sherman's men entered Columbia, the city was already on edge. Fires spread through the streets in the chaos that followed. No one knew exactly how the blaze began, but by dawn, more than half the city lay in ashes. Sherman later admitted he never ordered the destruction, but neither did he regret the outcome. To him, anything that ended the war sooner was justified. Meanwhile, the Confederacy stumbled from disaster to disaster. With Fort Fisher captured and Fort Anderson abandoned, Wilmington, the last major Confederate port, was suddenly wide open to Union occupation. General Hoke fought valiantly, even earning the nickname the Stone Wall of Forks Road for his determined stand. He believed he could hold the city once reinforcements arrived, but his hope was shattered when General Braxton Bragg countermanded the planned support and then abruptly ordered Hoke to abandon Wilmington entirely. It was a decision that baffled many and weakened Confederate morale even further. Far from the battlefield, the Union gathered in Washington, D.C. under cold March rain for Abraham Lincoln's second inauguration. If any moment reflected the transformation of the nation's spirit, it was this one. Mud covered the roads, crowds pushed and jostled for space, and yet there was something electric in the air, a belief that the war's end was near. Frederick Douglass later claimed he felt murder in the air that day, a premonition of danger around the president. John Wilkes Booth stood in those very crowds, close enough to see Lincoln clearly. He chose not to act, but later boasted he could have killed the president then and there. Yet Lincoln survived the day, and his powerful inaugural address reminded the country of its moral purpose: to finish the work, to bind the wounds of the nation, and to begin the long road toward peace. Those words echoed northward with pride and southward with despair. While Lincoln spoke to crowds under a stormy sky, Sherman carved his way deeper into North Carolina. Northern newspapers worried he might be defeated in the swamps, but those concerns could not have been further from the truth. Sherman moved with frightening speed, burning towns and dismantling Confederate infrastructure. The rebels rarely fought. Instead, they retreated city after city. Fayetteville fell next, marking yet another step in Sherman's relentless advance. But at last resistance gathered. General Joseph E. Johnston, whom Robert E. Lee had convinced President Jefferson Davis to reinstate, hurried to unite the scattered rebel forces. Lee's orders were clear: concentrate all available troops and stop Sherman before he reached the safety of Grant's army. Sherman, fully aware that an attack was inevitable, pressed forward toward Goldsboro with confidence. He said, "I can whip Joe Johnston." The meeting between the two armies came at Bentonville. Here, for the last time in the war, the Confederates struck with real fury. Johnston's men took early advantage, surprising the Yankees and pushing them back. But the Union's numbers, coordination, and reinforcements soon shifted the balance. By the end, Johnston was forced into retreat, telling Lee with resignation, "I can do no more than annoy him." The truth was undeniable. Nothing could stop Sherman's push, and nothing could save the Confederacy from collapse. The Confederate flame, once bright, defiant, and proud, flickered weakly now, like a candle in a winter storm. Everyone knew the end was near, but the final blow had yet to come. Even as the Confederacy crumbled, there were still men unwilling to let the final spark of resistance die. In Virginia, Robert E. Lee and General John B. Gordon prepared one last desperate gamble. The situation in Petersburg was dire. Lee's lines were stretched impossibly thin, his men starving, exhausted, and massively outnumbered. Yet still, he could not bear to surrender without attempting something bold enough to change fate, or at least delay it. What followed was Lee's last offensive, aimed at breaking the Union siege by striking Fort Stedman in a surprise pre-dawn assault. Gordon devised a daring plan, one more suited to the start of a war than its final days. He gathered his commanders that night, and standing on a stump illuminated by dim lantern light, told them that if they could seize the fort, reinforcements would flood in to smash the Union lines. His men, old veterans with hardened expressions and frayed uniforms, pledged to follow him. Under cover of darkness, a group of Confederate soldiers approached the Union picket line, pretending to surrender. Their commander shouted, "Come back, don't go," in a performance so convincing that some Union troops hesitated, just long enough. Then gunfire erupted, signaling the beginning of Gordon's attack. The Confederates surged forward like a tidal wave. In the blackness before dawn, confusion reigned inside the Union defenses. Many Northern soldiers were caught asleep. Others were playing cards. Suddenly, they were confronted with rebel sharpshooters and bayonets only feet away. Fort Stedman fell quickly, and with it, a surge of hope spread through the Confederate ranks for the first time in months. Gordon and his commanders believed they might actually break the siege. But the momentum didn't last. When Confederate forces moved toward the neighboring forts, Haskell and McGillivray, they met fierce Union resistance. These forts had been warned and were ready. Heavy Union artillery tore into the advancing Confederates, shredding their formations and slowing their attack. The element of surprise evaporated with the rising sun. Gordon's men, once so close to victory, now found themselves trapped. They held Stedman, but the surrounding territory, the key ground they needed to expand their foothold, remained firmly in Union hands. Ammunition dwindled, options vanished, the tide had turned. Gordon ordered a retreat. It became a massacre. As Confederate soldiers fled across open ground, Northern cannons poured fire into them. Men fell by the dozens, the attack collapsing into chaos and bloodshed. More than 2,600 Confederate soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured in mere hours. The defeat was catastrophic, and for Lee, it was the final blow. Any hope of prolonging the war evaporated at Fort Stedman. Days later, another disaster struck at the Battle of Five Forks. This Union victory severed one of the last supply routes into Petersburg. Lee had no choice but to abandon both Petersburg and Richmond, the Confederate capital. The fall of these cities shook the entire South. The Confederate government fled, moving from town to town, trying to escape the inevitable. The war was nearly over. Lee began marching his remaining men westward, hoping to link up with Joseph Johnston in North Carolina. But the Union Army pursued relentlessly. Many Confederates simply gave up along the roadside. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs, boots wore thin, clothes hung loose on skeletal frames. Desertion became an avalanche. Still, Lee pushed onward. He believed his men deserved one last chance, one last attempt at joining their comrades in the Carolinas. But the Union forces closed in from all directions. At Appomattox Courthouse, surrounded and heavily outnumbered, Lee faced the truth he had avoided for too long. His men attempted a final breakout under General Gordon, and for a brief shining moment it worked. They pushed the Union cavalry back, but then, as more Federal troops poured into the field, the Confederate advance collapsed once more. Lee realized the fight was finished. "There is nothing left me to do," he told his officers, "but to go and see General Grant, and I would rather die 1,000 deaths." But surrender was the only choice. On the afternoon of April 9, 1865, inside the modest home of Wilmer McLean, the two giants of the Civil War met face to face. Grant, muddy from riding through the rain, greeted Lee respectfully. Their conversation began with small talk, an odd, almost surreal pause between two men who had shaped the fate of a nation. Then came the terms. Grant offered generous conditions. Confederate soldiers would be fed. Officers could keep their sidearms. None would be imprisoned. All would be allowed to return home. Even horses were permitted to remain with their riders, for spring planting was approaching, and Grant knew the South would need them to rebuild. Lee accepted. The war, at least symbolically, was over. Union officers began cheering outside, celebrating the victory of a lifetime. But Grant silenced them. "The war is over," he said quietly. "The rebels are our countrymen again." Small battles continued for a few weeks, mostly desperate final stands by those unwilling to accept reality. But one by one, Confederate generals surrendered. Johnston on April 26th, Richard Taylor on May 4th, and finally the last major Confederate army in May, after the final fight at Palmito Ranch in Texas. By summer, the guns of the Civil War finally fell silent. The United States, no longer the United States are, but the United States is, had survived its greatest trial. The cost, however, was unimaginable. More than 700,000 soldiers were dead. Tens of thousands of civilians had perished. Cities were ashes. Landscapes were scarred. Families were shattered forever. The war introduced a new age of industrial killing, repeating rifles, ironclads, trench warfare, weapons and tactics that foreshadowed the horrors of the 20th century. Yet it also ended slavery, preserved the Union, and determined the direction of modern America. Today, people still debate the meaning of the Civil War. Was it a moral crusade, a tragic mistake, a necessary conflict? Opinions vary, but one truth stands above all. Across the world today, if you ask anyone outside the United States, every American is simply a Yankee.